Mid-South. You wrote in your book, Mid-South was rolling along just fine because Bill loved to keep an iron fist on all parts of the business. He wasn't afraid to put his foot down when he needed, especially when the wrestlers he fought so hard to protect. Most of the boys would take Cowboy's famous fines with their mouths shut, but some wouldn't, like Dick Murdoch. We talked a little bit about Dick Murdoch in our other episode, but talk to me about the fines and how Dick handled those fines with the Cowboy.
Oh, Murdoch was a classic. I remember talking to him one time. He got fined for something, I think being late. He was habitually late. Cowboy hated people that were tardy. Didn't understand why people couldn't tell time and be there. He wanted you to be at work on time, mentally ready to go, and in shape and motivated. And so, and Murdoch could do all those things. When Murdoch wanted to perform, he was just about as good as anybody I've ever seen. And I've seen him the best in these last almost 50 years. But Dickie told me one time, he said, well, I got Cowboy this time. I said, what did you do, Dick? He said, well, he fined me. I can't remember what it was, $500 or something like that. And so Murdoch decided that if he didn't move forward on this thing, that Cowboy would and not cash the check, because he got fined almost everything he was going to make. I mean, Cowboy hit him hard on this, but it had been a repeat offender. And Dickie, I think, sometimes just wanted to see how far he could push the big Cowboy. And, you know, they had that Oklahoma-Texas rivalry thing going, and Bill was the boss, and Murdoch was the anti-establishment. So consequently, Murdoch says to me, I'm not going to cash that check, and he'll never be able to balance his checkbook. That was his comeback.
My goodness.
He'll never be able to balance his checkbook. He'll always be looking for this money, and I'm not cashing his check. And so then Murdoch took the check and framed it and put it in his bar in Amarillo called Dick's Dive. And there it was on the wall. So Murdoch really got back. Dickie, it's funny how guys think, right? But Cowboy was very meticulous with his money, obviously. And so Murdoch's idea was, well, he won't be able to balance his checkbook. He'll be frustrated. He'll be pissed off, wondering what the hell happened. And so that was Dickie's deal. But when Murdoch was motivated and he was in a program that he liked and then working with somebody that he liked, he was about as good as there was. There was talk, more than casual talk, about Murdoch becoming the NWA champion at one time, believe it or not. But the promoters were just worried about his, you know, Dickie was like to clown around in the ring sometimes. He had his Three Stooges routine, and he had all kinds of things that he did. But he was tough to. I got along with him great, and I had a van, and he liked to drive. He's like Tony Schiavone. He liked to drive, and so Dickie drove my van, and we drank beer, and he drank more than me. He could drink more beer than the only guy I saw that could drink more beer than Murdoch was Andre.
Wow.
And, yeah. So Murd had two hollow legs, I used to tell him.
So, yeah, I've never heard that before. I love that.
So he was a hell of a character. But the thought was, can Dickie work well enough as a babyface or a heel to travel these territories,
right,
and represent the NWA title as it was intended to do? Well, the answer was yes. Great worker. But what are you going to get? You getting a Three Stooges comedy routine tonight, or are you getting, you know, I remember refereeing the match one time. He had a great program in Mid-South, did Murdoch, with Killer Carl Cox, who was one of the best workers I ever saw. And a great heel, great strategist, great psychology. And I'm refereeing. And I remember we were in Baton Rouge, remember like it was yesterday. And Murdoch Cox pushed Murdoch back in the corner and started doing comedy. And Cox, they were in a serious angle. I mean, they beat the shit out of each other. A lot of blood, a lot of violence, a lot of aggression. And so Murdoch was farting around, and Cox was pissed because he felt like that's going to cost him money, and there's serious angle, and it was a good point.
Right.
So I'm standing on Murdoch's left because he's right-handed. So if you're a referee and you got somebody going in the corner, you want to get it off their dominant hand so that you don't get hit in the face with an elbow coming back like that to punch somebody. And Cox, he didn't rear off. He had like a 6-inch punch. Boom, boom. And he knocked Murdoch's ass almost out. His legs went limp.
Oh, wow.
And I grabbed one arm to hold him up because Cox told me to. Grab him. And then Cox got the other arm and swung Murd back into the corner. But it's just a different. I can only imagine when guys were doing comedy today, when they occasionally do it, and how that would work in those days. I know how it would work. Guys took everything very seriously. Yes. They only got paid off the houses. They didn't get, there wasn't pay-per-views. There wasn't other the merchandise was not a big deal. Added a little bit, not much. So, but when Dickie wanted to work, he was about as good as you could find. It's just what you get. On some days you weren't quite sure what you're going to get. And I also noticed that I can't remember when Cowboy passed out the checks. I think it was midweek at TV or something, at the interviews, and then the TVs. And I always thought that was kind of a mistake. Those guys would get boo-boo face before television if they didn't get the payoff that they thought they deserved. But Cowboy didn't care. You're getting what you earned, and that's that. So it was interesting education in so many areas of pro wrestling. For me, to be a future administrator and executive officer, blah blah blah. It's like getting a PhD in this shit. So it was crazy. There we are. Cowboy, good old JR. I remember that tie. Jan bought it for me. Nice tie. Big Cowboy. Bright-eyed. Boy, he was smart. Great strategist. But he had that Vince Lombardi feel about him. The former coach of the Packers, who was a staunch disciplinarian, had rules that you had to adhere to and abide by. And so, and the irony of that is Cowboy really never changed. If you came into the territory, you knew that there was a fine system in place. Cowboy didn't have many rules, but he expected you to adhere and to follow the rules that were laid out. And I don't think that's a bad philosophy, but his problem was Cowboy, and I love him. He's still alive and well, sharp as ever. He lives in the Ozarks, in retirement. He's in his 80s, and sometimes his presentation skills were a little bit stiff, and some guys could adapt to the stiffness. Some guys couldn't. That's his booking book. I've looked at that a million times.